by asking you kind of how you can describe your time at Pace, what brought you to Pace and what made you were, and kind of just generally describing your time here.
Definitely. So I initially started at Pace as an economics major. I think it's a little bit rare to come in as an economics major. I quickly learned they convert a lot of people into the major there. So um, I wanted to go to school in New York City. I toured Pace. I really liked it. I came in as purely economics, and in my University of 101 class, I had a senior that was also an economics major, and at the time gave me some advice about maybe double majoring with math or trying out computer science, and that was really interesting to me because I actually wanted to go into math at one point before coming to Pace, and everyone said, you know, don't major in math unless you want to teach math, which I didn't want to do. So I went away from that, and so it was actually kind of exciting to hear someone say that. I ended up adding the math as another major. I added computer science as a minor later that year, and so that's kind of how I got to majoring in both of those, minoring in that. And then while I was there, I kind of just joined every club I could think of at first. So I ended up in a mix of things from originally writing for the economics newsletter, then becoming the editor in chief of that, doing the Fed challenge and Up to Us, which was the fiscal policy challenge, um, doing student government. I started as the Dyson president and then the executive president of that. So just tried to try as many things as possible, honestly.
Absolutely. So, which one of those? So, you said you were an economics major and
Mm-hmm.
you had a minor in computer science.
Yes, yeah.
So, you came in as an economics major?
Right. Yep. So I came in economics only and I ended up double majoring in economics and math and minor in computer science.
Okay. So, then how did those majors influence kind of your? You said you joined as many clubs as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? What kind of influenced you there? What clubs had you joined because of your major, and how did those kind of play off of each other?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things was I couldn't necessarily go into an economics class thinking like a math major, or into a math class thinking like an economics major, or you just would fail. I mean, like the mindset that you needed for each of those was different, and so that was kind of fun to me that you got to, turn off one part of your brain and turn on the other for different classes. That played kind of nicely into things like for the economics newsletter, for instance, it was a lot heavier in the writing side than I think uh, really any of those uh, academic fields were by themselves. So it let me try to apply what I was learning in economics, but actually articulate that in a way that wasn't just necessarily answering what a professor had taught me and then trying to answer back to them, but actually doing some research about something new that may be related to what they were talking about, but in a new way, and then expressing that to other people myself in my own way rather than in their way.
Absolutely. So, speaking on like kind of your own projects and doing your own
Mm-hmm.
things, what were some of your passion projects, some of the things that you were really involved in outside of school while you were at Pace?
Well, RentRedi was probably the biggest passion project of that. I I got an internship sophomore spring and then into that summer, and so at the time I was living at 182 Broadway, the dorm, and so it made sense to get my first apartment, and so I got an apartment for an internship that summer, and that really set me on the path of doing RentRedi. And so that was really my passion project for junior and senior year when I was just working on in my free time, having fun building an app for myself and friends to try to make the renting process a little bit better for all of us.
Absolutely. So, end up how did that end up transitioning into kind of what Rent Ready is today? So, Like, let me rephrase that question a little bit.
Yeah.
So you said that it started out as an app for you and your friends.
Hmm.
So was it a conscious decision to say, hey, I want to make this a business, or did it kind of happen more naturally?
It was a little more natural, honestly. So I really, the way it started was we were looking for apartments on like Zillow, and that made the process of finding the apartment really easy. When we were, me and a couple friends that were also PACE students were, looking for a place to live. But we quickly found out that there was a lot more to actually renting an apartment, like getting your application together and all of these other things that made it still very difficult. Like we showed up at one of these apartments and we loved it. And they told us, great, we need your W-2, letter of employment, bank statements, tax returns, your students. So we want your student transcript. For us, we had guarantors at the time too. So they wanted all of that for our guarantors. And ultimately, we didn't get that apartment. And so we kind of came away from that experience feeling like, we were really bad at renting. And I mean, maybe we were, but it seemed like everybody else was also having that same feeling when they were going to find a place. It was a really stressful process. So initially the app was just for myself and friends to get together documents and send those to landlords. But what I later found out was that there were a lot of landlords, the majority of landlords in the US are these smaller landlords that have like 9 to 5 jobs and are managing properties themselves. And that it was really trickling down from them not really having access to something to make it easier for them. And then that was making it harder for renters too. And it wasn't just like the applications itself. I mean, it spanned into paying rent. Was, I mean, a lot of people were still paying by check, which I was doing the same thing of. You were like calling some maintenance person for maintenance issues, and if they forgot about it, it just didn't get fixed. And there was really no way of communicating well with the landlord. So it has since grown a lot beyond applications. It really goes from listings to applications and screenings, paying rent, maintenance, communication. But I mean, it was more of a natural process of starting out with the little piece that I had seen and trying to help, myself and friends, and then talking to other landlords and tenants and finding out the bigger picture for things that maybe I hadn't personally experienced yet.
Absolutely. And would you mind like describing that kind of process a little bit more? What I mean is you kind of described to me that you're you're more of the software developer,
Right.
right? So you were more kind of behind the scenes working on how to get this product to be the best you could make it.
Right.
So what was the process like for you to go, okay, so this is an app that now I see it, you saw a market for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You saw a market for it. How did you begin to capitalize on the market? And did you have help along the way? And what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I definitely had help along the way. It originally was, so I was starting from that summer. I finished that summer internship at Goldman, and I was kind of at this point where I was like, okay, do I go back and intern again next summer, or do I try something new? And for me, I felt like I wanted to try out something that was um, going into a company when they were having problems. I wasn't really looking at RentRedi at that point as a full-time job. Going into a company when they were having problems, trying to fix those problems and coming out of that. And so I went into consulting the next summer, and I got to do that, come in when everything's on fire and try to fix it. But the thing I didn't really like with that still was that even though you poured all this time and effort into figuring out what the problem was, you never got to see if you were right or wrong, if it actually worked. So I then was trying to figure out, okay, well, where can you go in, see a problem, try to fix it, and actually implement it? And that then to me was like, okay, well, that's starting your own business. So it was kind of a natural transition to say, I was originally just building this app as a fun thing. I mean, it was a free app. I wasn't looking at it necessarily as a business. And then fast forward basically a year to saying, okay, maybe it would make sense to do this as a full time job. And I mean, two big factors in there really were that. So my dad had gone through being my guarantor on that apartment. We play a lot of basketball together. And so the initial idea for RentRedi was just like us playing basketball and being like, this can't be this difficult for everybody. It just seems outrageous. And really, luckily, we have very complementary skill sets in terms of he has worked in sales and marketing most of my life. I naturally skew towards the technology side of things, so it made sense to just kind of go to him and say, hey, like, would you want to do this full time with me? It kind of works perfectly given what we both like. And so we still work on, or he's he co-founded it with me. And the big push honestly was that there was a meetup in New York City for students from all different schools. That's the summer before I went into consulting, and I met a couple people that later went into venture capital. And so one of those people that I met said, hey, the firm I'm working at is doing like a student pitch competition. Would you want to come pitch at this? And at first I was like, I don't even have a working product yet, but she said, just come anyway, pitch, it'll be fun. Worst comes to worst, at least you get to, like, try articulating your idea in front of some people. And so I did get to go do that. I got a lot of positive feedback. That honestly was a big part of what pushed me to start looking at it as more of a, okay, this can be like a real business that I can run, and it can, help a lot of people, and it would be a lot of fun to do.
Absolutely. And what was the feedback from that pitch?
So the interesting thing is, when I went and pitched to those investors, their job is basically to poke holes in the idea any way they can. And if you can plug up all of those holes, then you're doing pretty well. And if not, then you have some things to still figure out. And so I went through a couple talks with different people there, which was good. I mean, each step you get further into it, it's just like any job interview, really, or internship interview, or anything for a club. The further you get in, it means you've done some things right. And so I ultimately came out of that with some holes I could not plug up, which was actually part of the reason for us saying, okay, we really need to get the landlords on board with this first. Because the way I was thinking of it at the time was, me and friends, we'd download this app, we'd gather all of our documents. The way I was looking at it was really like I used a college common app to apply to all of these different colleges when I went there. So I got all of my information together one time, and then I could send it anywhere I wanted, and I wouldn't have to keep refilling out this info. The same concept applied to the application process for renting in my mind. Was everybody's asking for the same thing. So rather than me stress out about getting it to you in 30 minutes once I've viewed this apartment that I like, why not do it ahead of time, and I can just apply anywhere? So that's still a part of it. But the piece that flipped, which really came from a lot of those discussions, was that rather than have this be something that's pushed to tenants and have tenants download and use this, it's more so that we get the landlord on board first, and then they push it out to their tenants or prospective tenants if they have a vacant unit looking for people to apply.
Absolutely. So by the time you graduated PACE and you're a graduate, what was your plan going forward? And like, where was RentRedi in that plan, and kind of where was the product at?
Even when I graduated, it still was something I was doing for fun, but I wasn't really looking at it as a business. I started working at PwC full time after graduating. And it really wasn't until that fall that friend came to me and said, hey, we're doing this pitch competition. Would you want to try it? At that point, I was just working on RentRedi in my free time. I was like basically going to work like 7 to 10 p.m. and then I was coming home. I was honestly living with my sister at the time. And I would just work on RentRedi until the early morning hours. Eventually she kicked me into the stairwell because I was annoying her with my light. But we have some pretty funny photos from that time where I'm like sitting in a stairwell with my computer and her just laughing at me. So it's good.
That's awesome. I feel like every entrepreneur needs like that one picture. I think we all know the Jeff Bezos Amazon picture from like 1996. So when did you decide that, okay, so you had that pitch and you were like, there's some holes in this, but these are holes I can fix.
Right.
When did you kind of decide that maybe I want to do this full time? And
It was really pretty much like right after that pitch competition. I mean, I was already getting more and more interested in it just like naturally. I mean, I think the more I was programming it and the further it was getting along to a finished product, just the more exciting it got to like see it start to come to life. Um, and so it kind of just worked out well that I was getting incredibly interested in what I was doing. And I felt like I didn't have enough time. Even if I was coming home at 10, I was staying up till like 4, I still didn't feel like I had enough time to work as much time as I wanted to work on it. And at that same time, uh, that was like October, November of 2016. And so I left PwC in the beginning of December of 2016 and started full time on RentRedi.
so was that completely out of your own pockets at this point?
Yeah,
So you quit your full time job. That's a really scary thing
right.
because that's a stable income, a stable job, and now it's like, okay, I have this passion project that I'm working on for X amount of years through college. I'm doing this full time. What was your kind of your mindset at that point, and how prepared did you feel to kind of take it on full time?
Yeah, I mean, it was out of pocket for the first year and a year and a half, maybe. Luckily, my tendency is to be quite a bit of a saver. So, I mean, it was like one day something came where I was like, okay, this is what it's all for, right? Like anybody that saves any money, it's for something. Like, what's your big buy? For me, it just happened to be like the company I wanted to work on. So that was pretty much how I looked at it. I did end up moving back home for about a year of that. Moved back to New York City at one point. Our first funding honestly came from just going on Meetup and going to these events where investors were meeting each other to get advice. And I just decided I'll show up. And when they ask, what are you doing? I'll tell them about my business that's for landlords and tenants. And from that, some of them said, this is great. We'd love this, but like, are you also taking funding? And definitely. So they became my first investors were really like landlords that were interested in the platform itself.
And what did you, so that was really interesting. The meetup part is it's tough because I don't know if we can quite do that nowadays with COVID,
Right.
but how formative do you think that really was? And what did you kind of learn from those experiences at those meetups?
I think it's super helpful. I mean, in some ways it is harder, but in other ways it might be easier. I mean, I know a lot of different groups that used to meet in person are now meeting online. So, if, for example, you would have wanted to go to some event in your particular industry and they only meet in California and you're in New York and you can't, you know, buy a plane ticket to California to go to that event, then it's like, okay, well, now that they're online, maybe I can go to this and still meet some people. So there's like, Tech Day New York, even that's normally in New York City, they're still doing this year, but it's online. So um, I think there's still a chance to meet people that you want to meet in any field, even if it's not in person for now.
Absolutely. And what would you say is like your tried and true method of finding these events? You mentioned Meetup, but was that the only application you used?
Yeah, I mean, there's just different online communities too, where you can just find different groups. I mean, almost for anything like Stack. If you're a programmer, there's obviously like Stack Overflow and Quora, just for like almost anything. So part of it was also just looking for like where are people going to meet each other, like if I was starting an apparel company, then like what they if I'm trying to sell to someone that would buy, some t-shirt, like where would I go to find them? What would they be looking for? Because I mean, realistically, most people, anybody at any stage is looking for advice from somebody, because it's helpful. So if you can just go where they're looking for advice themselves, a lot of the time you can maybe, get a chance to talk to them and hopefully they like whatever you're working on and give it a shot.
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic advice, but maybe my opinion is biased. You had mentioned funding. So you talked about your first round of funding being from people you had met from these meetups.
Right.
What did you use, if you don't mind, how much was that first round and kind of what did you use that money for?
Yeah, so that first round was about $50,000. And that was, I mean, still at that point, it was just pretty much all programming and the first little bit of marketing. So all of that money really just went towards buying us a little more time to develop and then starting to try to market to some of these landlords to get them to adopt the platform.
Absolutely. And when did you kind of start to see that that pay off? So you got the $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
About how long do you think it took you kind of maybe pay that money back and then really see a return on it?
I mean, we definitely saw it start to pay off pretty quickly in terms of people coming to the site because we went from basically just putting a website out there and not having, you only have inbound marketing of someone happening to search something that you happen to rank for organically and they click through. But I mean, I think it depends on the business in terms of like the return on investment. At least for us, it wasn't so much like, can I get a high return immediately, so much as can you get a lot of adoption and a lot of people very interested in it. And I think that is in a lot of cases, especially at that stage, what people in the venture capital world are typically looking at in like a pre-seed or seed round, where you're trying to prove from that money, or even earlier, which like ours is like, so essentially you have like friends and family, then you maybe have a pre-seed or a seed round, and then A and B, and you don't have to do all of those, but those are kind of the steps throughout funding that you can do. In those earlier stages like that we were at, we were just trying to prove product market fit. So prove that like this product that had been built, that was built based on feedback with other people, was actually something they wanted to use, and that they would be happy using. And so that was really the groundwork we were trying to lay in order to go into the next round, which was where they were saying really, you have a product that people really like now, and can you now scale that? And that was really the past year or so now's goal.
So, and I'm assuming that it was successful. And so you said the last year or so has been like kind of your scaling phase.
Right.
What does that really kind of look like for you?
So at the point where we raised the 50,000 from landlords that were from Meetup mainly, it was just myself, my dad. Even last fall, we actually had that spring and summer reached out to Pace, got a few Pace interns, or interns in general. One of the Pace interns is actually on our team today. So she's our front end developer and UI UX designer, which is really cool that transitioned well. And so we raised about $1.4 million last fall in venture funding. And that came honestly, again, from going to another event. Tech Day New York was one of the events. I got to pitch on the stage there. Someone swung by our booth and said, hey, I liked your pitch, but we do later stage funding than you guys are at right now. I said, that's okay. Well, if you know anybody that's at our stage, would love to talk to them. And luckily, he made like a perfect introduction to someone that was right at our stage. We got along with great, totally aligned with it, just in terms of like what we feel like is really important in terms of businesses. They're very customer centric, and that is very much how we are. Like, we've had live chat on the site since day one. We have a lot of conversations with landlords and tenants both. So that was kind of a perfect match. And that's when we brought on about 8 people last October, and then really have spent most of this year scaling up. And now we have landlords actively managing in all 50 states.
Wow. So you went from 3 employees, one of them including your father and yourself, and an intern from Pace, to now you're at 12?
Yeah, we're about 12 now.
And so what did that 1.4 million, if you don't mind me asking again, that went towards not only employees, but I'm assuming marketing and kind of like, is there anything else that you were like, this is a necessity to kind of grow our business?
Really, team honestly was a huge piece of that. And that was honestly one of the things that I like when we were talking about like getting advice from other people. I've gotten a lot of good advice, luckily, from people along the way. The firm TIA Ventures that led our last round, one of the big things that they talked to me at the time was saying, you know, when I first was introduced to them, I was thinking we'd raise $500,000. I would hire more of like a scrappy team. Like myself, I mean, that was where I was coming from my own standpoint of like, you know, I worked on it myself to build it. So I would hire more people like me to figure out the marketing side of things, and build out the product more. And so they really said, you know, we think it would make more sense for you to raise more money, spend more on the team, basically get a team that's better than even the stage you're at. You know what I mean? In terms of like invest more in the team now and get a really great group of people, and then grow into that. And so I think that was the really key advice that came from that, is that we do have I'm like very proud of the team we have now. And it's a lot of thanks to that because, you know, we had the resources to bring on really talented people.
Absolutely. That's super interesting. That's because, like you said, you would think you'd want to hire. This is like you started out in your sister's staircase, really. So, did you have to? This may be a bit much, but I'm kind of curious. Did you have to give up equity for that 1.4 million?
Definitely. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean,
are you obliged to say how much, or is that?
I mean, that's one of the things where it's, if you ever watch like Shark Tank or something, they'll talk about like you'd rather own 1% of $1 billion company than 100% of, you know, $100 company. So, I mean, that is the natural progression of it. Is you'll get investment, you'll give up certain pieces of the company, and that's okay. You hopefully don't give up so much that, you know, it disincentivizes you. But I think if you meet the right people, they actually keep that in mind too. And they don't want you to do that either, because they realize a lot of it comes from you personally being invested in all that is to come from the hard work.
Absolutely. And how was that? So, from my knowledge of watching plenty of Shark Tank, in order to get equity, in order for money, you need to value your company.
Right.
So, what's your mindset going into, okay, so this person wants to offer me, you said you were looking for $500,000 to start.
Yeah.
That means you
How
have
do
to
you
value
value
this
it?
company. How do you do that when it's a project you've been working on for so long?
Yeah, for me, it was more so letting them value it. I think they're more in a position of being able to say, we've looked at all of these different companies. And I mean, I think you have to take every one of those valuations with a grain of salt and say, okay, do I agree with them or not? Or, you know, why? But I think it's better to go into those talks not necessarily giving a valuation. I think that is one of the things that's maybe different than Shark Tank. Is like on Shark Tank, you would walk in and say, I'm giving up X% of my company for this much money. I would leave out the percentage of the company and just say what you need in order to get to whatever stage you want to get to, before you would need to raise again, if you would need to raise again. So I would kind of work it backwards from saying, okay, if we're here today and I want to be here and I need this much money over this much time to get there, then okay, I'm going to go, you know, try to talk to people and say, this is what we need. This is where we're at. This is my plan of how we'll get there, which they'll really appreciate that, like, you've thought through, not just saying, I want this much money, but like this is what I would use it for, even on a granular level, to get to this other stage. And then, then it just turns into negotiation, in terms of if you need to. I mean, if you don't, then that's awesome too.
Right. So are they helping you out more? So for like Shark Tank, for example, I forget her name, but like I know she owns like part of QVC and she does all this stuff. So not only are they giving you equity, but they're giving you their expertise, or not giving you money, but they're giving you their expertise. How has that kind of experience been for you, um, kind of receiving help from the people who gave you that funding?
Definitely. I mean, there's definitely a huge amount of help on that respect. I think everybody, hopefully everybody has some sort of expertise or superpower, if you will, in terms of what they're really good at, or their domain knowledge. Like for TIA Ventures, theirs was really like understanding the customer, or even flipping that around as a company and saying, how could you understand your customer better by doing X, Y, and Z? Or the advice of like how to build this team, and things like that. So we talk with them regularly. We have like a Slack with them and everything. So no, they're great. We also had River Park Ventures, who Andy Applebaum co-founded Seamless there, and they have a lot of expertise in terms of understanding how to grow companies as well, which has been really helpful. They've also invested in a few companies that are in the property management, or not necessarily property management, but the prop tech space, which has been incredibly helpful. And then we also had some people, even one that graduated from Pace, that have been in real estate before, in terms of at Blackstone and other really accomplished real estate companies. And so they've been able to take it from the perspective of, okay, this is what I know from my experience about people in the real estate world, and how can you tailor messaging or the product itself to better fit them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for answering that. I'm going to change gears just a little bit. How has your day-to-day changed from, let's say, a year and a half ago when it was just maybe you and your father,
Mm-hmm.
and then to now that you have 12 employees?
A lot. A year and a half ago, it was pretty much just program all day. Well, a year and a half ago, we were really talking with um, different people about the raise. But I mean, before that, it was almost entirely programming, and then it started to shift towards more on the marketing side, more on the fundraising side. Obviously, a lot on the support. All of the support initially was literally, if you messaged in over the live chat, you got me or my father, is one of the two of us. So there was obviously more of that. The more people you get on the platform, the more support you're likely going to get in. Versus now today, it really it really depends on the day, honestly. I think it's more like waking up every day and going, okay, like what needs the most help today? And it might be, jumping over more on the programming side. It might be more on the marketing side. It might be something with partnerships with someone new that we're going to work with. And that is a big one with us, where, we partner with different companies as well. It might be hiring or anything like that. So, I mean, it can be all over. It's a lot different in that someone on the team is really has become like the expert in any particular area that we might have been wearing the hat for before in a lot of cases. But you still kind of jump between anything.
Absolutely. I think it's super interesting. I'm like a nerd for this stuff. So, okay. So I'm so sorry. I completely lost my train of thought. I had something next and it completely lost me. Wow. Day. Okay. So looking back at what you know now, what piece of advice what would you have liked to know while you were in college? So let's say you knew where you were going to be now.
Mhm.
What advice would you like to have given a younger self while maybe you were in college? Um, that's
Um, that's a good question. Honestly, I think I luckily had other students and professors and other people at that time that really gave me the advice that I needed in terms of I think it was a very smart move for me to pick up the extra major and to pick up computer science as a minor. Honestly, programming, I still feel like is like one of those things that is so helpful to anybody. I mean, even if you don't go into it, just the the mindset that you have while doing it, that it's working through this logical series of steps to try to figure out some sort of problem, I feel like is just so applicable to literally anything you do. It could be like mapping your way through a conversation you're going to have with somebody before you have it, so that you know, think through all the different possibilities of the way it could go or something like that. um Honestly, maybe the one that I would have given myself is maybe just start uh, working on it as a business sooner. You know, you can always start a little bit sooner, so it would be it would saved a little bit of time if I jumped into it a little bit earlier. But of course, there's a scary jump to that.
absolutely. And I'm a little, I I'm his best salesman, guys, I promise. But looking at the product, like it's so intuitive as an avid customer. I feel like this, you had mentioned it before, being very customer
Mhm.
oriented. Oriented. I always mess it up. But being very customer oriented, you look at a product and when it just makes sense, you're like, I don't even know how to start. And you just made this product that kind of puts it all together. So, but maybe from my perspective, maybe possibly spending all that time programming and not making a business made it into the product it is today.
Right. And I mean, it really didn't start that way. It really started with just one piece that I could see, then show it to somebody, see what they say, and really ask for honest feedback and be totally okay with like getting, unfortunately, a lot of the time not positive, which is okay. I mean, that's whatever I could improve. And then changing that thing and bringing it back to more people and saying, okay, well, how about now? And just keep, continually do that. We still do it today. I mean, even the product is changing literally every day, and a lot of it, if not all of it, is really driven off of somebody messaging in saying, "Hey, what about this?" or "This was confusing to me," or "Have you thought about this?" or "Why does this work this way?" And when you start to uh, a little bit later on, you get a lot more volume, but you can do that even from like day one, whether it's just with like friends or family or people you're going to school with. Like literally ask anybody and everybody what they think or how they feel about it. And you know, if you get enough opinions, you get to the right answer, which is the really cool thing, because it's just whatever is natural to the people you're showing it to.
Absolutely. And I think that's a super something I've noticed throughout this entire conversation is it seems to me that there's a very common theme in this networking. And I'm sure like every business 255 student is like screaming right now because they're sick of hearing that word. But it's a you're a case study because it seems like a lot of what you got off, you had those meetups and it was just talking to people, getting people's feedback about your product. Like, hey, like, what do you think about this? And would you agree that it was like a very important aspect of what kind of led to your success?
Definitely. And the interesting thing is, I honestly didn't consider myself, and I still don't really consider myself all that great at networking. So if you feel the same way, I'm with you actually. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's just, a lot of it does come down to, putting yourself at least in a position to meet somebody that could potentially help, and not being able to, afraid to ask for that help, or of course, being thankful for it when it comes.
So you said you didn't necessarily view yourself that way. How did you kind of step out of that box? Like, do you have any like tips for someone who maybe feels similar to like how you felt?
Yeah, I mean, if going to a networking event itself seems scary, then I think a way to get started in it is to go to an event or attend online an event that isn't necessarily networking. In that, like, I had a friend at Pace that said, hey, there's like a coding like boot camp or something that you can go to for a day. Do you want to just go to that? And like, we'll get to learn some new software. It's sponsored by someone, that this company Quantopian, that had like back testing where you could take a bunch of like stock data and build some program for it and see if you had run this like programmatic trading program that you were writing on it, would if you made or lost money. And it was just like a, one day event, but in going to that, you met a bunch of new people that also were trying out this, new software. And so in a way, like, that was networking. If it was just going to, even going to those meetups, in a lot of ways, I didn't necessarily think of it as, oh, I'm going to go to this to get out of it, like someone that's in my quote unquote network. I almost looked at it more of like, okay, can I just go get feedback? Like, I didn't personally know a lot of landlords, and I was trying to build a product for landlords. So for me, it was like, okay, well, can I just go to a place where landlords are and ask them the question? If they say it's good or it's bad, I ask why. And if nothing else, I at least got some information out of that I can, take back to changing or modifying what I'm working on.
I'm just going to step in here for a sec. We have a question in the chat box about your internship at Goldman. Yes. What kind of internship did you get there?
So as a finance internship, I was working on the unsecured debt team. So my job was mainly around their maturity schedule and things in those respects. So basically all of the unsecured debt that Goldman Sachs or any other subsidiaries had, we were essentially tracking.
All right, Riley, you can go ahead, continue. If you have one or two more questions.
Absolutely. Oh, one or two more. This is so tough. So you shouldn't have done that to me. Okay. One or two more. Oh, okay. So I kind of have a general question about like the future of your business. And it's kind of going to be two-sided a little bit. One kind of being like, what are you excited about for the future of your business? You have this investment, you have this great team around you that you're growing into. What kind of excites you about that? And then do you ever plan on completely selling the company?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the future, the really exciting thing is that at a high level, a lot of these landlords, particularly in the segment that we're targeting, are like, they could be like a student just graduated from college. They could have a kid that they've just saved up some money and they buy their first property and they want to rent it out to get some additional income. In a lot of ways, they have a common theme, which is they're looking for financial freedom. Like, they buy properties that are rental properties, hoping that those, as students, a lot of the time when we go get our first apartment, we're thinking of it from the perspective we're paying rent in, but that person that has bought that property on the other side, a lot of the time is looking at that as steady monthly income that they can have, so that they maybe can retire a little early or put a kid of their own through college, or for some of them eventually leave their 9-to-5 job and just completely, focus on that portfolio of properties. And so the really interesting thing is that in a lot of cases, just like, we're having a conversation about like starting a business, they have a lot of their own questions about like, how do I, buy my first property? What's the best way to collect rent? How do I do the maintenance side? What should I be looking for in applications or screenings to make sure I'm getting the right person in my unit? And so a lot of these things we can help them to avoid any of the mistakes that you would possibly make your first time doing it, because you have this kind of collective knowledge of all of these other people that have used it before you. And the product itself has been shaped around really the best practices of all of these thousands of different landlords. So it's really cool that it's making it a lot more accessible for landlords or individuals to get into owning rental properties, and making that a way for them to live a little bit better, whatever that means to them. And then also on the flip side of things, making like life a bit more convenient on the tenant side of things. So you're not, waking up out of bed and like going to put like a check in like a mailbox or mailing it to somebody, or like when you have a maintenance issue, like you take a video of it and you're not getting a whole bunch of messages back and forth about how severe is it and do I need to come over, and oh, the person you sent it to actually forgot, and the manager would have made sure, or the owner would have made sure they did it, but they had no idea it was even happening. So like all of these things that, you know, a lot of the time can lead to turnover, because you like find this apartment on Zillow and you're incredibly excited, or realtor.com or any of these different ones, you're excited about it. But by the end of the lease, you're like, I don't want to live here anymore because XYZ happened. So if you can eliminate that, you know, it just makes where you live so much nicer, you know.
We have another follow-up question in the chat box about how hard was it to get your internship positions that you had, and did networking play a role in getting those?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, a PACE event directly impacted that. So I had gone to an event. I kind of stumbled upon it, I'll be honest. That was at PACE, like on the 6th floor, west side. And I saw that this event was going on. They had a couple people from Goldman in there presenting about the team. And so I decided to go in there. I didn't know what was happening. So I was a little late. So I was like sitting on the floor for this presentation. And so it was a good lesson in having my resume on me. Luckily, I did have a resume on me. And so after they had presented, you could ask questions. And then when they were leaving, they stopped in the hallway for a minute and I gave one of them my resume, got a chance to talk to him a little bit about, you know, what my majors were. I was on the Fed team at the time, what I was doing in school, what I was interested in. And they just said, you know, thanks, and we'll let you know. And so I got a call maybe like a month later. It was like an evening on a school night. I was at a club meeting. I had like a midterm. I don't think it was a final. I think it was a midterm the next day because it was around October-ish. And they said, can you come in for an interview tomorrow? And I was like, I'm sorry, I can't. I have a midterm, which was also not the right thing to say. And luckily I had a senior next to me at the time that said, I came back into the room because I had stepped out, and they said, what was that? And I told them, and they said, you need to call them back and call the professor. They will be okay with you moving the midterm. You need to go to that interview. So luckily I did call back. The professor was very understanding. So I got to go to the interview and also take my midterm still and not have that impact me. But yeah, so I mean, definitely without that event, I wouldn't have even known about the job or met anybody that could have passed me along to interview there.
All right, Riley, do you have one more question?
Oh man, you kind of, I'm a little dry right now. Okay, actually, I got one more. So talking about kind of your time at PACE a little bit, what resources do you really just were like, if I had this, maybe not resource that you wish you had, but resource that you think would be very useful to young entrepreneurial students who kind of maybe had a similar path to yours?
Resources that are already available at PACE, or that I would like to be?
Either or, whatever one you.
Okay. Resources that are already available, I honestly really do think, and I mean, it was told to me a bunch, but it definitely does matter. Like putting together a LinkedIn is super helpful. Like even if it's just like put a photo on there and put where you like what you're majoring in and anything you're involved in school or outside of school. Like if you're volunteering anywhere or you're working on any side projects of your own or businesses of your own, that's always somewhere I definitely look anytime I talk to anybody. And so it's really helpful for context. I mean, even Riley, I know in prepping for, you know, meeting you, I saw that you grew up not that far from where I grew up, which is pretty rare for me to find. So that's pretty cool. So, I mean, that's one. Another is through there are other PACE people, and at least for the other PACE friends of mine, I mean, almost everybody that I've ever reached out to that was further into their career than me that I wanted to talk to that I graduated from PACE, they've always been super open to talking. And likewise, I mean, if any PACE student ever reaches out to me, they're I'm happy to talk to them just because, you know, it hasn't been that long. I mean, you feel the same way. So it's always nice just to talk to people that are in the same place.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Ryan and Riley, for having this conversation. It was really great. We've recorded it, so we're going to put it on the website as well for if you want to recommend anyone want to see it. And thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, have a good night.
Thanks, Riley. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.